May the 1st, 8 in the morning, 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Last night I completed the transfer of the bees from the Langstroth hive into the Layens and placed the Layens hive exactly where the Langstroth used to be. So on the one hand, we're seeing right now the underside of the spacer platform that was on the Langstroth hive. These are a few bees that clustered overnight, and over here we see the bees that had to spend the night outside in front of the door because last night I had the opening set to those fine circular dots so that no bees could leave the hive, and of course that also meant that no bees could come in. So there was quite a cluster this morning outside, which would have been some real late arrivals from the foragers last night that had to spend the night outside. And so I've rotated that now, and you can see already where there's a number of them now that are busy spraying their pheromone to let everybody know that this is the new official door for going in and out. And it was encouraging to see when I switched this position, I did not have a mass exodus of bees wanting to leave the hive. So the ones that are in there are comfortable where they are. And at the same time, those that were outside are anxious to join the rest of the gang. The bee you see on its back is not necessarily a bee that is in distress. It just would have been one of several that appear on the front step right now as though they are dead. In fact, they're in a bit of a stupor from being cold overnight, and as the air temperature comes up, they will revive nicely and carry on their merry way. Because of the cold temperature, you can see that everybody's kind of groggy. This cluster, they just hung together last night, providing mutual warmth. They're also starting to show signs of mobility. And as the temperature gets up closer to 50, they'll all be migrating over and rejoining the rest of the flock. So the presence of sunlight, now that the sun's risen a little bit higher, bearing down directly on their bodies, has had a pronounced effect on their activity level. And we can hear the first flyers. And with this no mobility, the ones that were bivouacked overnight in a tight cluster are now also slowly moving over to their new landing board, where a little earlier on I placed a number of spray shots with my sugar water bottle, which is 1-to-1 water and syrup, and you can see the tiny little specks as well as a few larger globs, and they're definitely starting to feed on that. Getting some energy back. Also grooming each other. The location is the same, of course, for them, but the details of the environment have changed, so quite a bit of exploring and adapting going on. And we'll check back in this afternoon, see how they're doing. It's now 9:30, and you can see there's considerable fanning going on. Also cleanup of little particles on the landing board. 3 minutes ago, I saw the first bee come in with pollen. And the group that bivouacked on the bottom board overnight has almost completely disappeared now. You can see there's a few that are remaining. But largely they've gone back to the hive. They're quite fastidious when it comes to cleaning surfaces. Seems to be their focus in that group. And I thought I would see if I could also illustrate last night. There was a group that had gone to bearding, and I think these were primarily foragers that returned after I had locked things up. And just now one of the chickens appears to have laid an egg. At any rate, if we can forget about that noise for a minute, we're going to go underneath the landing board here to where there's a cluster from last night. Because they're in the shade, they still haven't really loosened up that much. So it'll take some more warm-up of temperature before they really come alive. Because of the evaporation of nectar in a hive in the process of making honey, there's a tendency for that humidity to collect on the walls of the hive and condense as water droplets, which in turn then leads to the formation of mold, which you can see on the inside faces. And I believe at this point in time, the remaining bees that are up in that corner working on that is all they are doing is keeping that mold growth in check, working as a cleanup. And once they've got that done to their satisfaction, then of course they will end up moving over and going to work with the rest of the population on collecting nectar and pollen. Well, it's now 10 o'clock and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, so let's check in and see how our guys are doing that were bearding last night and spent the night camping outside. Let's see how much more activity there is. Definitely coming awake. And overall the group appears to be getting smaller. So last night I shook out 8 deep frames and 8 medium frames into the new Layens hive, and then those frames in turn went into these 2 boxes overnight. And this morning I've been watching to see if there are any forager bees that are exiting from the small reduced entrance in the bottom, and I really haven't seen anything that suggests that the only thing left in this hive is the nurse bees that are tending to the eggs and the larvae. Later on today, I'll be going once more through each individual frame to make sure that I do not see the queen, thereby suggesting that the queen definitely ended up in the Layens hive when I did the transferring last night. And there's one solitary bee that has just actually come out of that reduced entrance. Which could be a nurse bee that has finally graduated to become a forager. And the hope is that that bee will actually head over to the Layens hive, which would suggest that it was actually an existing worker bee returning to what it sees as its normal home. On the other hand, if that bee comes back to this location, then that's confirmation that this is a nurse bee that has now left on its very first flight as a forager, in which case it would zero in on this reduced entrance and come back to this location. It is now noon. Temperature is 67 degrees Fahrenheit. It's an update on activity. We see pollen coming in of different shades and colors. And it's encouraging to see that they're definitely walking into the hive with the pollen, so it looks like the acceptance is there. I might also add that the beard that we saw, beard of bees that we saw underneath the landing board earlier on this morning has completely disappeared. Just an overall very nice level of activity going on. My hope is that they will enjoy their new home as much as I will enjoy actually working with them in their new home, because the Layens hive is so much more user-friendly for the backyard beekeeper than the Langstroth arrangement. This will help illustrate the kind of trauma that the bees are faced with moving from a Langstroth to a Layens hive. On the left is a Langstroth deep frame pulled out of the hive, which they were actively working on. You see the large amount of kept brood, and there are open cells as well, where there are larvae, which is the whitish colored objects that you see. Across the bottom you see drone cells. For drones, those are the larger ones, and there's also along the top frame larger cells, which are drone cells. And what they're moving into now is a Layens hive, in which I've got frames that in area are 30% larger than the Langstroth frame to the left. But at the same time, there is simply honey store from last year, as you can see with the capped cells, and all the empty combs. So at the moment they're moving into a place that has no existing brood, but the queen has all kinds of space in which to lay eggs. And the biggest thing we've accomplished with this move is, number one, we've created a brood break, which helps in reducing the amount of varroa mites that are a perennial problem for them. And of course, secondly, for the beekeeper, the Layens hive is a much more user-friendly system to use. This will help illustrate the kind of trauma that the bees are faced with moving from a Langstroth to a Layens hive. On the left is a Langstroth deep frame pulled out of the hive, which they were actively working on. You see the large amount of kept brood, and there are open cells as well, where there are larvae, which is the whitish colored objects that you see. Across the bottom you see drone cells. For drones, those are the larger ones, and there's also along the top frame larger cells, which are drone cells. And what they're moving into now is a Layens hive, in which I've got frames that in area are 30% larger than the Langstroth frame to the left. But at the same time, there is simply honey store from last year, as you can see with the capped cells, and all the empty combs. So at the moment they're moving into a place that has no existing brood, but the queen has all kinds of space in which to lay eggs. And the biggest thing we've accomplished with this move is, number one, we've created a brood break, which helps in reducing the amount of varroa mites that are a perennial problem for them. And of course, secondly, for the beekeeper, the Layens hive is a much more user-friendly system to use.